Good afternoon, honorable members. When when the business of the House suspended, the honorable member for Anderson had the floor. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I just was wondering if I can backtrack a little because North Abaco reminded me that part of the Defense Force story in the HMBS Flamingo incident, horrible incident, was that Lieutenant Commander Neely, who I referred to as being on that vessel, played an even more significant role during that period. And specifically, I'm advised that he, after having everyone abandoning the vessel, he boarded an A1 vessel, which is a small, is it inflatable? Small inflatable, in the midst of all of the firing and the rockets and the machine gun fire. And he went in the dark looking for survivors from the crew. And I'm told that he received commendation, a medal, and since then received other awards and medals for his performance and his bravery. And so just for completeness, I just wanted to speak about his incredible conduct during that very, very difficult time. And so, Mr. Speaker, the member for Elizabeth is not here, and we heard from the member from Garden Hills, both of whom spoke at length about how the PLP could not run a housing program, and thank God for the FNM. And as I've indicated, that it's a level of debate that's really not desirable because it doesn't advance the cause of Bahamian people, and frankly, they're not interested. They really want to know what is the current plan for housing in the Bahamas. But just on that point, and as I reiterated, I've been reminded that the Free National Movement housing program was similarly, or even more so, signified by shoddy work and lots and lots of problems, which in the Chippenham area, and I think the member for Garden Hills, I'm told, was the minister. And so it's quite surprising that he would try to make that kind of, he was Paulsec? Okay, Paulsec at the time. That's right, he was Paulsec in the Ministry of Housing. He's the minister this time. He was Parliamentary Secretary with responsibility for housing. I think the minister at the time was from East Grand Bahama. But, you know, it just seems to me peculiar that he would overlook that important part of his own performance and history to point fingers at another administration. The Bahamian people are not interested in that. And I think that, you know, while we hear the government side, you know, chronically praising themselves and their performance and speaking about the people's government, all of these cliches, the Bahamian people are truly not interested in it. They want to see at the end of the day how they're going to advance their cause. And I heard the member for Elizabeth say that somebody was in a house and had run into default in mortgages. And I heard him talk about the mortgage corporation. And then he sort of contradicted himself because he went into the larger problem of mortgages in the Bahamas. So if you have a problem of wide default in the aftermath of a recession in banks everywhere, you'd see it in the mortgage corporation. That's not peculiar. That's not a political issue. You'd see it there. It's only natural that you would see it there as you would have seen in Scotiabank, Royal Bank, and all the other banks. But he said in this house that someone who defaulted said to him, they ain't got to pay because their MP put them here. And let me just say for the record, I can't say he's not, you know, that story is not correct. But I have never, in my 16 years of representation of people, heard people say that. They might say, I'm in trouble, I can't pay, what I can do? But to say, I don't have to pay because my MP put me. I've never heard that. And I think we have to be careful that we don't seek to perpetuate stereotypes because, you know, the stereotypes oftentimes are associated with a certain demographic. And you have to be careful of that because it's a dumbing down of the Bahamian people, and it's not true. It's not true that we are a dumb people. And so I think that most people everyone I've come across know that if they have a debt, if they don't pay it's because they can't. But to say that they don't have to pay it, because I mean, you know, I just want to caution to be careful with those sorts of stories. And, you know, it'd be good if he could verify it, but I've never seen it, Speaker. Speaker, the member for Yamacross spoke about the history of land, history of the Bahamian people, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. And he talked about the Middle Passage. And this is something I talk about a lot because I truly believe in this. The history of the Bahamian people, by and large, the masses, not every single person, because we have people from different demographics. I spoke about one today, from the Greek community. But we come from all different demographics. But by and large, Bahamians are of African descent. And we came through the Middle Passage into these shores. And the people are our ancestors who came before us. And there's been a lot of intermixing since then. But our ancestors went through the pain and the indignity of a slavery regime and all of the implications of that. And then as more and more empowerment came, there was colonialism, a form of the colonialism in the Bahamas, which had its own implications to self-realization. And then, of course, you had majority rule. Majority rule and the struggle for majority rule was about rediscovering the dignity of people of African descent to a large extent, because at that time, there was a social and economic and political construct which sought to perpetuate the history of the people of African descent. And so majority rule was a lot to do with the sort of redemption of a people. And so this is what governance should be post-1967, whether you're PLP or FNM. It should be about redeeming, advancing, and bringing to full fruition a people who have had this difficult, horrible, painful history. But it's one that's also beautiful because it's one of resilience and triumph. And so that is what governance is about. Housing anywhere in the world, but housing in the Bahamas, or affordable housing, is a human right. And successive governments have sought to tackle the issue. It was not a Hubert Ingram per se, even though he was a very effective minister of housing. It was the policy of the government at the time, and he was the executioner, and he did so well. We had, during our own time, a Shane Gibson, who was prolific. Shane Gibson built so many houses throughout the country, and which was part of a policy initiative. There have been stops and starts, imperfections and failings, and I think that for someone to come in here and say, well, because we just wear red, you know, somehow that's supposed to mean something, I think it's a disservice. The question now is, how do we meet this issue or this mandate of providing affordable housing, a human right, to the masses? And I looked online to the definition of multiple housing, affordable housing, and there were multiple definitions. But the general thing was that it's to address the housing needs of the lower or middle income households, where a majority of the population isn't able to buy houses at the market price. So that's how affordable housing is. And we've heard that sometimes the price of housing has been, you wouldn't describe it as affordable because the price ends up being up there. And that's because, you know, it's just the efforts were imperfect in that regard, in that specific regard. But affordable housing is, the whole concept is that you're able to access. The difficulty I have with this, well, I don't have a difficulty per se. We also had a similar concept to the bill that's before this Parliament, under Shane Gibson at that time, who was the former member for Golden Gates. He had tiers of involvement. He had the first tier was mass production of houses nationwide, and many, many people became owners of homes during that period. He also built at that time a few rental units, and there's one on East Street in my constituency. So he brought that component, the rental unit component. So we had full house ownership, rental unit component. And then he had this component, the service lot component. And so, and this was really the lower tier of at our time, our housing policy. And in terms of the housing, what he also did, and what the administration did at that time, houses were built in communities. So you'll see now in Engliston, several houses built by the Ministry of Housing, which remained in the community and caused people to stay in the community. And so the service lot is not, no disrespect to Yamakwa, it's not revolutionary because we did this. But this was actually a lower tier of a housing policy. So I don't object in principle to service lots, because the concept is known to us and it's being executed before in our country. What I do have a problem with, and maybe we'll hear it explained so we can understand it better, is how is it that someone of what you would call lower income households, which is by and large the people I represent, who were able to obtain houses under prior administrations, how are they going to do this two-step thing of acquiring land at 30,000 or less, or whatever it is, let's say 30,000, acquiring land. I don't know how you're going to find the 30, if it's going to be through the mortgage corporation, I don't know. But you have to, first, the lot is 30,000. Then you have to go further. You're given 2 years with the minister having discretion to extend at his, in the appropriate circumstances. You have 2 years to buy all of the materials, to do all that is required to complete a home. And in a real world, the people I represent, you ain't talking about them in here. You're not talking about them. This is going to be difficult for the people of Engliston to access. This could be, and this is going to be difficult even probably for people like teachers and police officers and those type of professionals, because, you know, I don't know how this is going to work. This may be a good concept for maybe people a little higher up in the economic rung, but for the average low-wage individual who has a burning desire to own their own home, this is going to be a hurdle for them. And so I am trusting that this is not the sum total of the housing program of this administration, as it was not for us, and I'm hoping that we will see a deeper involvement in housing and to provide housing for people of lower and middle income salaries, Mr. Speaker. And in that regard, I just on the issue, I want to talk, when you talk about the rental units, like this has been an ongoing issue. It's not a political issue, but as a member of parliament, I want to say that we have to ensure that the rental units are, that the standards of the physical condition of those buildings are kept, because they have been allowed to deteriorate over the years. They create safety conditions, and you could even argue in some instances the government has become a slum landlord. And so I want to urge that the Minister of Housing brings a focus to ensuring the upgrade of conditions of those rental units, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, just in summary, I would just say that and you know, the issue, I just want to say the issue of the statue, the Yamakro, because North Abaco reiterated it. The Lyndon Pindling statue at the Lyndon Pindling International Airport is what is described as life-size. It was the desire of the family that was the approach that we take. When I was in South Africa, there was one of Mandela that looked about 100 feet. It was huge. But they wanted something that was life-size. And indeed, you know, it's not so much about the size. I think for me, it's more about the fact that we are inundated with symbols around us of an alien or even what could be deemed a negative impact on our people. And we don't have in equal form or standard indigenous or representations that uphold and celebrate our history. And so that is why the statue at the airport is that size. It's actually a couple inches larger than his actual height. But I felt very proud about that project because it was the first time, there was a government-initiated project. It went through a competition with artists. Committee was appointed with historian and artists, well-known artists. The family was very much involved. It went through the phases of development of the actual thing, and it was actually given ultimately to a Bahamian in Abaco who had he was able to melt, and Johnson. He did, well, I didn't know that, yeah. Oh, I thought he did one. So, you know, that's why it's there. So I think what we need to do, we just need to just to shift the way in which we see ourselves, and that's very important. And a part of doing that is advancing the cause of our people and knowing the history of our people. And we cannot forget those who are at the bottom of the economic rung in our countries, because, you know, our country, we're not here to, at least I'm not here, to pursue the interests of the powerful and the wealthy, they could do for themselves. They could do for me, you, and everybody else. It's those who are most vulnerable. And before I sit down, I have 30 seconds. I want to just raise an issue. I've had a lot of complaints in the last few days. Some changes have been made at the Department of Social Services, and it may be just an adjustment period, but a lot of people are complaining that they're running into difficulties at the various offices, and that their benefits are being reviewed in a way in which it is putting them really below the poverty line and really straining and stressing. So I see the member for Kalani here, who comes from Bain and Grantstown, who grew up sewing pants and selling newspaper, to not forget those people who go to social services. Don't forget, you rich now?
Yeah, you're rich.
Oh, Lord. Don't forget those people. And if you could review to see what is happening at these offices. Kalani, if you could see what's happening in these offices, because in the last several days I've had multiple complaints about what is happening. And we cannot tolerate an environment in which the most vulnerable are being pushed to the wolves. We have to ensure that does never happen in the history of this country. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You be spotted, yeah. No, I tell you, I say we don't object to it, I tell you that. But you know, this can't be it though. You gotta come back in this.
As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
That's questionable. Well, it's side by side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to take part in this debate on behalf of the people of Exuma, Exuma Keys, and Ragged Island. Mr. Speaker, as we debate access to affordable homes, it has been 9 months since the people of Ragged Island suffered total devastation during a hurricane, and very little has been done for them, even as another hurricane season is upon us. 9 months since the government made fanciful commitments to those people, and 9 months later, they are still suffering. Ragged Island has not nearly been restored, and the dreams of a green city on Ragged Island promised by this administration remain a dream. Not even so much as a green paper, or white paper, or position paper, or plan for the people of Ragged Island, proffered by this government. Mr. Speaker, I know you may tire of hearing it, but I will never tire of advocating for the people of Ragged Island, so long as they remain in distress. 9 months, Mr. Speaker. Had this government simply went to Ragged Island and said it would rebuild the administration building and restore the school and the nurse and the doctor and the clinic and the police station, with maybe some improvements, and committed to fixing the salt pond, getting the fishermen back to work, then we wouldn't be having this conversation today. But that wasn't simple enough, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister had to go and promise a green island. And so while we wait for this green island to materialize, almost a year later, a hurricane season again approaches. No school, no clinic, no nurse, no doctor, no government building, no hurricane shelter, no reliable water, while Ragged Islanders wait for relief or this magical green island. While I thank the Minister of Works, who recently this week sent engineers down to Ragged Island to do assessments, I must ask the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, to stop the wild promises and just give the people of Ragged Island basic standard services for now. Give them a sense of normalcy and the basic amenities that everyone else in the Bahamas enjoys. You know, Ragged Islanders are aspirational people. They're ambitious people. They welcome the concept of being the model for restoration. But we're 9 months in. 9 months. I also thank the Ragged Island Restoration Committee for their ongoing work on these issues and for showing some leadership in this regard. Meantime, I would like to thank private charities like Head Knowles in particular for all the assistance it has rendered to Ragged Island. Many thanks especially go out to Gina Knowles and Leah Head Rigby and many other Bahamians and friends of the Bahamas who donated directly to Ragged Island and ensured that donations reached the people who needed them in Ragged Island. 9 months in, Mr. Speaker, and I am advised that not a single shingle has reached the ground from NEMA or any agency of the government. 9 months in, Mr. Speaker, and I am advised that not a single shingle has reached the ground from NEMA or any other government agency. I therefore call for a full accounting of donations made to NEMA on behalf of the people of Ragged Island. Mr. Speaker, we are here to debate the Access of Affordable Homes Bill, and I gather the jury's amendment bill will come later. I don't intend to proffer an extensive contribution to that bill. I will leave it to the legal scholar and the QC, but I have no difficulty with requiring unanimous jury verdicts in capital murder cases and simple unanimous verdicts in non-capital cases. I have no great difficulty with the death penalty, Mr. Speaker, and while our courts are not perfect, they have proven fair and stringent in the process of appeals and allowing for the most part in a country plagued by such troubling murder problem to truly vet decisions of judges, juries, and the constitutionality of charges and trials. So there doesn't seem to be any unfairness inherent in the system when it works. However, Mr. Speaker, I do wonder if we're kidding ourselves about the death penalty in this country. There is currently no one under the sentence of death in the Bahamas, despite the rate of murders over the years. We seem to not be able to establish or find someone who has committed a heinous enough murder to definitively say, this is the worst of the worst. This despite people being convicted of slaughtering men, women, and children in the most gruesome manner for the most trivial of reasons. Little boys,
Honorable member.
little boys,
Honorable member. You appear to be anticipating the debate on the Jurors Act or the amendment.
that's fine, Mr. Speaker. I'll move on. I will move on. I will move on, Mr. Speaker. And I'm guided by my friend from North Abaco, who has promised to be consistently forward-looking in this place. And I will hold him to this. And we will have more to say about that later, Mr. Speaker. But today, what I want to talk about is a good first step in affordable access to affordable homes in the Bahamas. Just a good first step, though. Concerning the Access to Affordable Homes Bill, Mr. Speaker, let me also say that I support reasonable efforts to increase Bahamian home ownership. And to the extent that one Bahamian gets relief, I'm on board. This bill, although lacking, appears to be a good first step in the right direction. You see, Elizabeth, a home is one of the most important purchases the vast majority of people could hope to make in their lifetime. And I say hope, Mr. Speaker, because for far too long, that is all most Bahamians have been able to do, hope. There are myriads of reasons that home ownership is out of the reach of many Bahamians, and even more reasons perhaps that many Bahamians who find themselves becoming homeowners through mortgages find themselves quickly behind in their payments or being foreclosed upon. Non-performing mortgages are around 15% in this country, Mr. Speaker. 15 out of every 100, 1 out of every 6 homeowner who finds it impossible to pay their mortgage. And those are the lucky people enough to qualify for the mortgage in the first place. And unfortunately, this government doesn't do much more than pretend to care or halfway talk about their plans. And I listened to a previous speaker today talk about how mortgages in arrears are down, but they only ever tell you half of the story. Bahamians want to know the whole story. And I happen to know, Mr. Speaker, that in the vein of mortgage relief and assessing the chronic state of bad mortgages in the Bahamas, there were private institutions that got together. They created a plan to resolve some of the issues, and it wasn't resolved, but to resolve some of the issues. I'll be happy to provide some more details on this for persons on the other side who might be interested. But the reality of the matter is that it was the former administration that facilitated this, and in large measure, the numbers that were presented as an improvement was because of this transaction by private lenders. Mr. Speaker, whilst this bill before us is interesting in its intent, Mr. Speaker, it seems a little fanciful when it comes to its practical application. Let's look at what it's supposed to do in a nutshell. This bill is to allow people who qualify for lots in government subdivisions to import building materials tax-free for a period of 2 years in which they must build their home or risk losing the exemption. It extends to government subdivisions in New Providence and the Family Islands. A noble effort. But who are we fooling? Most people can't qualify for the $100,000. Also, a local bank would facilitate for building a home, especially after having to qualify to buy the lot, as Angliston pointed out. Now, I'm guessing here because the details are often not well thought out by this government, but I'm guessing that these government lots are the ones that a senior member from the other side said his government would be offering to Bahamian people for $30,000. Help me, because I want to help my constituents and the Bahamian people to avail themselves. That was announced and just kind of lingered there with no follow-up. So I'm interested if this is what we're talking about. And if it isn't that land our Bahamian people can potentially build on, then exactly where is the land for $30,000 a lot that we were promised to avail to the Bahamian people? If that is the land, then let's bottom line this. If the lot is $30,000, the house will be, let's say, 1,000 square feet, lowballing at $100 per square foot for what a private contractor might charge. So we have a nice round number of $130,000 per house in the land. My friend from Garden Hill says it would cost more, but let's just say $130,000. How many Bahamians can realistically afford that on their own through a traditional financial institution? Now, if you say the intention is to facilitate these loans through a revamped Bahamas Mortgage Corporation, then that makes a little more sense. But I wonder why it would be limited to land in government subdivisions. Hasn't the Bahamas Mortgage Corp had some success in the last administration with financing low-cost homes through private developers? Also, Mr. Speaker, who is going to buy these homes? The natural answer, I suppose, would be government workers. These would, of course, be the government workers this administration has managed not to fire in the last year, or managed not to have shaken the job security previously associated with a government job. And unemployment is generally up. You can't get a mortgage unless you're employed. Maybe this government also ought to be speaking to its job creation plan. That's a statistic from your Department of Statistics. I suppose the dream of home ownership will have to wait a little longer for those unfortunate souls. So, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable member, are you on a point of order, Elizabeth? Yes. State the point of order.
The member from Exumas and Ragged Island was on a good wicket, but I believe he has misled this honorable House. He said that unemployment is generally up. I'd like to ask him to explain where he got the data to make that statement, because certainly on the basis of the last employment statistics, unemployment is down. So could you please justify that comment or withdraw it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what information Elizabeth is looking at. But
The Department of Statistics.
But let's begin with Grand Bahama. Youth unemployment in Grand Bahama exceeds 30%.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable
Mr.
member.
Speaker, the member from Elizabeth challenged me to determine or to advise this House where I got the information from that unemployment is up. And I'm answering. And I'm telling him that the Department of Statistics information,
Honorable member.
the Department of Statistics
Honorable
information,
member. What we don't want to do in your response is to get more unsubstantiated information. In other words, the member's asking you to substantiate. Are you able to substantiate?
Mr. Speaker, I'm making my presentation.
Yes.
And I'm making reference to the Department of Statistics, right? And I'm indicating to you, Mr. Speaker, members on the other side, if they're comfortable with the level of unemployment in the Bahamas, then fine, right?
No, honorable member.
I will reword it, Mr. Speaker. I will reword it because I will reword it, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw it and reword it. But let me say this. I am not one for political grandstanding and political games, Mr. Speaker. That's not my MO, and that's not why I'm here. The reality on the ground demonstrates an extremely high level of unemployment in this country. Yes. And if this government is satisfied with it, then so be it. But I'm making the point, Mr. Speaker, the point I am making the point that this government ought to proffer, as a part of its comprehensive housing plan, a job creation plan as well. So I'm not going to be sidetracked fighting over the statistics that we know exist and we all can easily access through the Department of Statistics. That's not why I'm here today. What I am here today is to indicate that there's an unacceptable level of unemployment in our country, firstly, and secondly, the thresholds for home ownership in our Bahamas must be improved because it's unacceptable to the people we seek to help. And they say it's the people's time. It surely ain't the poor people's time. Because these provisions in this haphazard piece of legislation, without comprehensive details, doesn't sufficiently address the obstacles that causes the Bahamian people to not be able to realize their hope and dream of home ownership in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, who is going to buy these homes? The natural answer would be the employed people. I suppose the dream of home ownership will have to wait a little longer for these unfortunate souls because this government don't have a job plan. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to make the imaginary leap that some unidentified number of Bahamians can afford these lots and qualify for loans to build houses. Then I suppose we take another imaginary leap to the minister who must approve the exemptions on these materials according to this bill. But I ask, why the minister? Last sitting we saw a minister being positioned to make decisions with respect to intercepting communications. This week we see a minister becoming all-powerful in determining which Bahamian is going to get exemption under this bill? Why is the politician the one approving the permissions to get these exemptions to build? Shouldn't there just be a transparent process that a board or a commission or, again, the Bahamas Mortgage Corp with their board can show that you're in compliance and you get the approval? Why risk a politician holding something as important as this in his hand and making him the sole arbiter of who is approved? Many Bahamians already live in fear, unfortunately, of being victimized by this administration. What if, for some reason, he or she doesn't feel like doing it that day? Is there a recourse in this bill that allows for an appeal? Who else can you go to if you've followed all the imaginary rules and yet you're still denied? I don't see any provision that says you must be informed of why you've been denied, or is this bill only intended for friends, family, and F&Ms? And then, Mr. Speaker, let us imagine that the minister does just this every day, and he doesn't go to cabinet or speaking engagement, or doesn't come to the House, or ignore all of his other responsibilities. Is that truly a transparent, accountable step in the ease of doing business and the ease of home ownership? I think not. Will it allow for people to build their homes in a timely manner? I think not, particularly if the lending institution demands proof of government tax exemptions with tax exemption approval before finalizing the loan, with a time before the time expires, as would now be the case with tax exempt. This is a chicken and egg situation being created. When I sit as a potential borrower with my loan officer, he or she has to be reasonably confident that I am going to get these exemptions if they're going to accept the numbers that I'm saying that I'm going to build for. This is why a defined, clear, transparent, apolitical approval process is required. Now let's talk about permitting, Mr. Speaker. If homes are being built one by one, then there would need to be separate permitting processes, no doubt, unless this bill is going to provide some transformative policies within the Ministry of Works and how this is done. Mr. Speaker, it appears that this bill is about getting the government out of building homes. And that seemed to align with some of the public utterances that we have received over a period of time.
He's getting really focused now.
Mr. Speaker, earlier I referred to unemployment statistics. And the Department of Statistics indicated on the 27th of January, 2018, that the rise in unemployment from 9.9% to 10.1% nationally was largely attributed to more than 6% reduction of jobs in the public service.
Wow. Rest your case now, rest your case. And no objection? What happened? All right. Elizabeth, you still there?
I thought he had something to say, Mr. Speaker, because he was so emphatic. He was so emphatic that his Department of Statistics said that unemployment was down. I am perplexed by this, Mr. Speaker, and this is why I don't respond to all of these things. I want to speak to getting more Bahamians in homes, more Bahamians to work, and more Bahamians across this country participating more actively in entrepreneurial ownership. That's what I'm about, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it appears that this bill is about getting the government out of building homes. And this seemed to align with some public utterances that I've heard before. And I think this is a mistake without an overhaul of the many pitfalls associated with going directly to a private contractor. As we all know, Mr. Speaker, building a home is one of the most stressful experiences imaginable in the Bahamas, as we all could attest, most of us anyhow. The government assumes incorrectly, I believe, that some private contractors, and I say some, who are barely regulated now, will not take advantage of these prospective homeowners. The lower income, most vulnerable ones, likely to be single mothers. Let's not kid ourselves. Who will monitor these projects to make sure that timelines are met and people are not taken advantage of? Poor people, dispossessed, the vulnerable, the people in the inner city that the other side profess to be looking out for. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that the government is not shirking its responsibility to protect low-income homeowners by transferring oversight to private citizens, the taxpayers. What baffles me about this right now, Mr. Speaker, is that the Minister of Housing is already afforded tax exemptions for government housing. So I question, do we really need legislation for this? This administration clearly wants to develop subdivisions and lots, hand them over to private individuals, private contractors, perhaps to build homes for Bahamians, thus enabling Bahamians to build with the same tax exemptions afforded to the Minister of Housing. And that's not a bad idea in theory. The practical model, however, assumes that those savings will be passed on to the home buyers who we're seeking to empower. But with or without this bill, the government still has to find the land and fund the infrastructure. Otherwise, you still put home ownership out of the reach of most Bahamians. Has the government done an assessment on cost of infrastructure? And is it suggesting that it will absorb such costs should it come to more than, say, $30,000 or less, as they indicated, and as was indicated by the previous PALSEC from the Ministry of Housing in the previous administration? So in addition to making sure the permit process at the Ministry of Works is not onerously protracted, and the minister has time to do this, and that he is not biased in his view as a politician, we will now need to cause the Ministry of Works and its agencies to be flexible and creative in its approach to reduce the cost of infrastructure for these homeowners to benefit generally, and homeowners across the country to have more affordable homes. This is what we must address if we are truly going to make home ownership more affordable. We must also consider, Mr. Speaker, the uniqueness of the family islands.
Yes.
In Exuma, for example, even after houses are built by very industrious Bahamians, Exumians, utility companies like BPL in particular often charge exorbitant amounts, sometimes thousands and thousands of dollars, to connect a homeowner in case where there's a home that's a far setback from the main road, as is often the case in many family islands. Yes. This is something where we need a government policy to address if we are truly going to comprehensively address affordable home ownership in the Bahamas. In my opinion, a more careful analysis of the reduction of taxes on building materials and low-cost land transactions, including value-added tax, need to be looked at to allow more access to home ownership and to make this bill more effective. Make home ownership more in the grasp of the average Bahamian, young couples, striving, industrious young men, single women. We also, Mr. Speaker, have to carefully consider the national economic policy for foreign investment in real estate, which naturally, over time, drives up the cost of land and the cost of homes for locals. Perhaps the time has come for a more shrewd government policy on the management of our land bank. Perhaps the time has come where long-term leases become the preference for foreign investors rather than outright purchase of Bahamian land, as is done in many developed countries already. After many decades of watching Bahamians get squeezed out of home ownership, we have to reconsider our approach to healing this imbalance over long term. But let's look at it in a forward-looking, comprehensive discussion on home ownership and land reform, on jobs and job creation, on partnership with the private sector, because the government can't do it alone, on acquisition perhaps of vacant land that's maybe not owned now by the government, refurbishment of old structures, comprehensive. What we would like to see from this government, calls themselves the People Time government, is more comprehensive policies, notwithstanding the gyrations we make in bills like this one. Example, remains one of the stubborn obstacles to home ownership. One way maybe to do this is to encourage more flexible financing options for first home payments that the government can codify into its guidelines. More direct tax breaks for homeowners, not just the ones buying lots in government subdivisions. A more comprehensive assessment is needed. Another way to have more affordable homes might be to look at new construction systems used elsewhere in the world that would still conform to our building code. Our Ministry of Works over time has to be more flexible, in my view, and swifter in assessing and approving new systems where they meet our code. It is generally observed that we are slow to embrace new systems, but perhaps more creativity is required to buck the status quo and make owning a home more affordable. Comprehensive assessment, Mr. Speaker. I am told, Mr. Speaker, that under the previous administration, systems were advanced to build two-bedroom homes for less than $40,000 each. We must creatively explore all options. That is, of course, with the concessions and the bulk buying power of the government. One of the things that I believe is being overlooked with this bill, Mr. Speaker, is that it is far less expensive per home to order and ship and build 100 homes. The cost per unit of building 100 homes would be much less than the cost per unit of building a single home. And this is one of the fundamental points that I believe is missing with this policy versus the building of government subdivisions that homeowners can access by buying the houses directly. This is one of the key drawbacks with this policy, to shift from building homes to selling individual lots. Further, if the government will not be building houses, what will become of the staff whose jobs it is to oversee the development of these infrastructures? Do we plan to fire them as well? Mr. Speaker, I also have a concern about what is to become of the land on which the shanty towns are now built, the lands that maybe the government is clearing out. I also have concerns on how and where these residents will be relocated. And of course, I await the government's white paper on this issue, on how it intends to address this issue comprehensively. Wrapping up, Mr. Speaker. Wrapping up, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated, a lot of this bill and the surrounding policies strike me as a way for government to get out of the building of homes. And that's a truly misguided and probably disastrous approach. And that is truly misguided. Rather than laying ad hoc bills, Yamakra, this government should fully articulate a comprehensive and progressive plan to make home ownership more attainable and more affordable. This haphazard bill, Mr. Speaker, raises more questions than answers.
But you can support it?
On the face of it,
You support it?
on the face of it,
We can hear it now.
this is not a sustainable program in the Providence
Supporting it, though. Let's hear it.
due to the scarcity of government land.
Hon-
Perhaps
Honorable members,
My Lord, man.
continue, Exuma.
I'm delighted that I'm creating so much excitement on the other side, Mr. Speaker. and hopefully these points they love so much, they can include in their comprehensive plan. But my questions are, is this sustainable in New Providence due to the scarcity of government land? Perhaps the other side will confirm to this House the amount and the location of remaining government land inventory in New Providence. I am advised the Bahamas Mortgage Corp has 10,000 applications pending, and the good member from Garden Hill said that there were about 300 vacant lots in one of the remaining subdivisions. So I think there's a gap that needs to be addressed. Mr. Speaker, Section 7.4 of the Act talks about retaking possession or title of a service lot. Which bank will lend money for these lots knowing that their collateral might be in trouble in 2 years? In the case of an individual who might marginally qualify, which bank will lend to them if they risk losing their exemption? 23 minutes, Mr. Mr. Speaker, I'm watching the clock.
That clock isn't moving.
I'm watching the clock, Mr. Speaker. But let me say this. Mr. Speaker. I'll wrap up
Honorable
now.
member,
I'll wrap up
you
now.
have an extension of a minute to wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will lay my questions under notices of questions. And I trust this government will begin to answer these questions and not continue to make a mockery, continue to make a mockery of this process. It's the government's responsibility, Mr. Speaker, to foster social, economic empowerment and to assist in uplifting Bahamians to become homeowners who normally couldn't do it by themselves. This policy and this bill further demonstrates a stark difference between this administration and the Progressive Liberal Party. The PLP is prepared to hold the hands of responsible Bahamians and mitigate the risk to put them in affordable homes. The F&M clearly prefers a hands-off approach. But I do encourage Bahamians. I encourage Bahamians to take charge of their financial circumstances. I encourage them to avoid reckless borrowing for trivial pursuits. And I encourage them to pursue the dream of home ownership. And because there's potential, Mr. Speaker, for the good people of Exuma, Ragged Island, and the Exuma Keys to potentially benefit from this first step, I will support it. But I expect more from the people-time government.
Honorable members, honorable members, just before we proceed, there was an interesting development during the presentation by the member for Exumas and Ragged Island. When I attended the CPA conference in the Seychelles, it became very apparent that a number of countries, in particular Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and several other countries, Kenya, came across or were faced with a development where members of parliament were able to access the internet and to verify or substantiate or present information that was read into the records of parliament. And a number of those countries are now in the process of developing and revising their rules with respect to accessing information via the internet. It was very interesting that the member for Angleton was able to research the information and provide the member for the exhumers with that information so that he could substantiate. In those countries, what has happened is those parliaments have developed an independent arm of the parliament that actually is do an independent research and supply all members with information while they are on their feet. We are hoping to get to that point. And the first step was when we indicated several weeks ago that members would be allowed to use their computers. And we want to move to that, to the information age and the digital age so that members can actually access information on time and online while they are on their feet. So I believe that that was a good development towards that end, and we're hoping that we are able to move this parliament to the modern technological age that some of our colleagues are beginning to experience in various countries within the Commonwealth. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I want to recognize someone who's very near and dear to me. That is my one and only daughter, who is in the gallery this afternoon. A young, bright, upcoming teacher, Mr. Speaker. Smart like a mummy. And certainly we expect great things from her. You might not know, but we come from a line of teachers. And so we were wondering where it was going to stop. We thought it was this generation, but it carries on. And so we're certainly very proud of her and wish her well as she approaches graduation. So soon I'll be liberated, Mr. Speaker.
It never happened.
I forgot what teachers get paid.
Parenting is a lifelong job, son. Lifelong. Never ends.
But, Mr. Speaker, it is indeed a pleasure to rise in this House once more to speak on behalf of the good people of East Grand Bahama. We are approaching that anniversary date of that very historic, momentous win on May 10th, 2017, when the Free National Movement was ushered in with a landslide victory. And as I listen to the members opposite, it reminds me of our responsibility to that confidence, that overwhelming confidence that the Bahamian people put in us. But it also reminds me that we too have to be careful, that we do not fall into the same complacency and delusion that the side opposite would have experienced during their time of euphoria, when they had similar kinds of numbers on this side of the aisle. But, Mr. Speaker, permit me to divert just a little bit, because the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, accompanied by his supporters, were in Grand Bahama, as he mentioned, this past weekend. And I am aware, Mr. Speaker, that they spent a considerable amount of time in East Grand Bahama campaigning, a futile effort. I understand they had a very successful rally. I understand about 75 people, I understand. So I congratulate them for that. You know, I remember those days, you know. I don't want to laugh too much, because I remember those days when we started out and similar kind of numbers. And so, you know, I don't make fun of the numbers, but I want the member to know that You know how Bahamians go, right? Don't mind them telling you stuff. You've been around a long time. Exactly, so you know how this goes. But some assertions were made. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That's on you. You should believe that. That's good. But some assertions were made. And Mr. Speaker, if I were not here for the last 5 years, I may be, misled into believing it. But I want to let the member know that Grand Bahama you see today, to the speaker, to the side opposite. Yeah, there you go. I want the members to know that the Grand Bahama you see today is not significantly different than the Grand Bahama they left in 2017. However, we have made some progress. You see, Mr. Speaker, they would sit here and have the Bahamian people to believe that Grand Bahama fell off the cliff on May 2017. They would have us believe, for instance, as one of the charges that was made in this rally, that they had the Grand Lucayan sold. It was all but sold. They had signed or just about ready to sign the deal.
Sounds like the $2,000.
And Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to talk about the deal, about that particular deal at this point, or that proposed deal at this point, because I think it would even embarrass the side opposite. But suffice it to say that the individuals that was at the table then are at the table today, but with a vastly different deal, one that we certainly think is an improvement. The members opposite are not unaware of how difficult these negotiations can be. And so the fact that it has taken the time that it has taken is a number of factors. Whenever you have more than two people involved in a deal, you end up with a protracted negotiation. And that's where it is. But I'm happy to say to the Bahamian people, particularly those people of Grand Bahama, that be not disheartened, because this government is working on your behalf, yes. And I am confident that at the end of the process, you will be pleased. Mr. Speaker, since May 2017, a number of positive developments have happened in Grand Bahama, including in East Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker. But I will not steal the thunder of the Minister for Grand Bahama, because he has had an impressive list of successes over the last year. And I am very proud of him, despite what I'm very proud of him and the accomplishments and the creativity that he has put into some of his programs. Who would have thought, Mr. Speaker, for instance, that the idea of a tech hub could actually take root, that it could actually come to fruition? Yes. And we are seeing the results of that today with the announcement of a significant initiative being taken in Freeport today with GIBC Solutions, a technology firm that is relocating to Grand Bahama, which will create 50 career jobs, new jobs for Bahamians, for Grand Bahamians, Mr. Speaker. Training that will afford these individuals to hopefully one day go off and do their own thing and help us to further solidify and deepen this new industry, this knowledge-based industry that we are trying to create in that space. Mr. Speaker, for the opposition to fix their mouth to talk about Grand Bahama is an insult to all Grand Bahamians and to the Bahamian people at large. Because I hear the member talk about lack of opportunity and joblessness and homelessness and all the rest of it. Mr. Speaker, when we came to office, the number of blue tarps on roofs, and the member from Marco City will tell you, as Pine Ridge, Central, I wouldn't talk about West End and Bimini, the number of blue tarp roofs that we met with no plan, Mr. Speaker, no plan.
Take out any MPs in Grand Bahama?
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And I don't know how they could fix their mouths, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I think we would all say that, Mr. Speaker, there's no point of order, not happening. Mr. Speaker,
If you,
no, I am
on a
not
point of
yielding,
order, honorable member.
unless there's a point of order.
I'm honorable member.
Unless there's a point of order.
Is the point of order Cat Island? No.
I didn't say I could.
I'm asking. Eh, 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 Are you rising on a point of order?
No, 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 Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, you'll have that opportunity. I understand that you're going to be speaking next. So, yes, you'll have that opportunity then.
You see, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will only refer to a comment that was made in here before. When you see the other side jumping up, it means that you're mashing some chords. That's all I would say about that, Mr. Speaker. But the facts bear out that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of Grand Bahamians who got no assistance from the former government. No assistance. And mind you, Mr. Speaker, not so the record is clear, I didn't say that no one got assistance. Because, yes, some people did get assistance. In fact, some people got 2 and 3 and 4 times assistance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Yeah, some say they were reckless. I don't know. But Mr. Speaker, when you talk about Grand Bahama,
You're talking about Nassau now, right?
yeah, I'm talking
Same thing out
about same thing in Nassau too. But Mr. Speaker, on a serious note, Grand Bahama is starting to show signs of recovery. The member for Exuma spoke about the unemployment rate, and while Grand Bahama certainly has a long way to go, we are seeing a slight dip in the unemployment rate, and we expect that with the initiatives that have come on board already, and with this introduction of these new industries, which, by the way, are in no small measure as the result of our Commercial Enterprise Act, which the other side criticized. And with the assistance through grants and through training that the Ministry of Grand Bahama and the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture have granted to young people, particularly in respect to the APRI program, which I am very impressed with, is creating new entrepreneurs and creating jobs as a result. So Grand Bahama, yes, it's not going as fast as we would like. Certainly we would like overnight success, but we all know that overnight success brings overnight failure. And so we're doing this right, Mr. Speaker, and we're building for sustainability. Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize and pay my respect to those Defense Force officers who would have lost their lives on May 10th, at the anniversary that we celebrate. And my colleague from the former Defense Force officer mentions that the last elections, May 10th, 2017, was called on that day. Very insensitive, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker. A very insensitive decision, Mr. Speaker. But nonetheless, we recognize those fallen soldiers today, and tomorrow there is a memorial services that we will attend, and we pay tribute to them. Mr. Speaker, there's so much to say, but Mr. Speaker, this bill, which is called the Access to Affordable Homes Bill, is one of those, I think, definable social bills that I believe that Bahamians will celebrate long into the future. For the first time, Mr. Speaker, Bahamians and those Bahamians of the working class Bahamians are being considered and are front and center in a piece of incentive legislation that will assist them to achieve the sometimes elusive dream of home ownership. Mr. Speaker, many Bahamians complain about legislation we pass in this honorable House that benefits foreigners, that have no effect on their lives. This bill today, Mr. Speaker, has direct impact upon the Bahamian people's lives. Mr. Speaker, in combination with the Prime Minister's Over the Hill initiative, this government is not speaking it, but demonstrating with tangible programs our commitment to the Bahamian people, to the upliftment of those who are vulnerable and underprivileged, and we are designing incentives and programs that will lift them to allow them to be able to have ownership, real ownership, in this Bahamian society. Mr. Speaker, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island spoke about who can afford to take advantage of this program. And he threw out a figure for construction of $100 per square foot. And he suggested that only the upper middle class, or that's words, and I put words in his mouth, I apologize. He suggested only a select few would be able to afford that mortgage. But Mr. Speaker, the cost of construction material bears direct correlation with the amount of duty that one pays on that building material. And the duty on building material can range anywhere from 15% to 42%, Mr. Speaker. And so this, not excluding exactly stamp tax and all the rest of it, but by the implementation and approval of this piece of legislation, you automatically reduce the cost of building by as much as 40%, Mr. Speaker. That is significant, Mr. Speaker. And so if the average cost of building today, duty paid, is $100, you can imagine what that is going to do for the average family, particularly those families who are just starting out, Mr. Speaker.
Exuma agrees with you.
I know Exuma. I'm going to come to Exuma in a minute, and I can tell you where I know his conviction cannot be.
No, he's agreeing with you. You have to say those things.
But, Mr. Speaker, it raises the other point, which is that only those persons who have a job will be able to afford a mortgage. But, Mr. Speaker, that is so obvious. It's like 1, 2, 3. But you know, Mr. Speaker, the thing that is funny about that is that the only people that didn't understand that was the side opposite when they were over here, Mr. Speaker. Because I'm sure we all remember the failed mortgage relief plan, where they told the Bahamian people, don't worry, we got you. Don't worry. You know, your mortgage is 6 months, a year in arrears. Don't worry, we got you. Until they go to the bank. And mind you, you know, the funny thing about it is, some people actually did get the $7,000. I think it was the max you could get.
4 or 5 would.
Something like that. Yeah, but 4 or 5 people actually got it. But you know what the problem is? They didn't have a job. And so guess what? They fell right back into arrears. but they told us they had mortgage relief. So the member for Exuma is correct. And I know he agrees with me.
Exuma said he wasn't there.
He wasn't there.
That's a new argument now. He blames the
That,
Premier.
that program was a cruel hoax on the most vulnerable people at their most vulnerable moment, Mr. Speaker. And so the member is correct. If you don't have a job, it's very difficult to qualify for a mortgage. That's why we're fighting so hard, Mr. Speaker, to revitalize this economy. That's why we're looking for new industries and new investments in our economy. Because we recognize that in order for persons to be able to benefit from all this country has to offer, that all of the tax incentives and other things that the government is trying to provide, that they need an income, Mr. Speaker. That is at the heart of it. But, Mr. Speaker, I wonder, since the member for Exuma and Ragged Island spoke so passionately about this idea that people who don't have a job ought to be helped, I wonder if he would maybe tell us how we might be able to achieve that. Because I'm certainly interested in it. You know, I'm certainly interested in that. I'd like to know, Mr. Speaker.
The member, honorable member, the member for Exuma, sir,
Speaker,
have a point of order?
I don't mind he's misleading me. I don't mind being challenged by the member for East Muhammad. But I want him when he quote me to quote me precisely and not misquote me.
He didn't quote me.
With the idea of mischief in mind. I never spoke to the point that he is raising about helping unemployed. What I said was, this government needs a job creation plan.
No, sir.
Because you gotta have a job to get a mortgage. Now, I never said it, Mr. Speaker, so he should pull the hand side if he want to dispute it, but I never said it. He's misquoting me, and he's intentionally misleading, Mr. Speaker. The usual mischief.
The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, he is correct in saying that if you do not have a job, it is difficult to qualify. But that is not what we're after, Mr. Speaker. That speaks to our economic plan. That speaks to our ability to create jobs in the economy. And I submit to you that we are, in fact, having success in that regard. But the class of individuals that we are speaking about today are those persons who are able to afford a mortgage, who are able to afford these homes, and there are thousands of them, but are not able to qualify for exorbitant mortgages that may ordinarily pertain to those persons who may be a little bit better off.
Huh?
So, Mr. Speaker,
Yeah, no,
this bill, there's a couple of questions, a couple of points that I wanted to speak on, and as I just go through the bill real quick. This bill or this act will only apply to government-designated subdivisions. And there's a number of reasons for that, Mr. Speaker. One, we have to be careful that we do not distort the construction industry. We have to be careful that we don't distort the real estate industry, Mr. Speaker. So this is intended to be targeted. It is intended to benefit those at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of those who may qualify. And it is targeted, Mr. Speaker. We are mindful, Mr. Speaker, that there is financial implications to this bill. And so when the member suggests that maybe, or he asks the question, why should this exemption not apply to other private developers? The fact of the matter is that we are mindful that we also have to protect the Treasury. We cannot afford wholesale elimination of duties and excise tax across the board. Otherwise, we will have chaos. And so this is very targeted, intended to assist the most vulnerable, those families who are deserving, who are qualified to access affordable homes, Mr. Speaker. The member also spoke about why should this bill, or why should the Minister of Finance be the person who determines whether the exemptions should apply or not. Mr. Speaker, the regulations will point out that it's the Minister of Housing who will determine which subdivisions are eligible for these exemptions. The Minister of Finance is the competent authority to issue any tax exemption. This is a money matter. And so the only statutory minister that can give that exemption is the Minister of Finance. And so, member for Exuma, that's why it speaks to the Minister of Finance. Pardon me? Say it again. That's not amended. It's not. Mr. Speaker. Yeah, that's not taken out. The authority of the Minister of Finance is not taken out in that regard. Mr. Speaker, the member also asked the question as to what happens if the Minister of Finance arbitrarily decides that he will not approve a request for an exemption. Well, the bill speaks to it, Mr. Speaker, in Article 6(3). And it says clearly, where the minister refuses an application made under this act, the applicant shall be notified of the reasons thereof in writing. And so the bill specifically anticipates that some minister may in the future, because it won't be this one, may decide that he wants to be spiteful or political or vindictive or whatever. And the act requires that minister to outline in writing why he would have denied such an exemption. And you can go to judicial review if at the end of the day you're not satisfied. In item number 7, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to point out one particular point. The member, again for Exuma, pointed out that it's your day. Pointed out that why don't we import in bulk? Why don't we use other building systems? And I agree with him on the building systems part. I think that there are more efficient ways, more cost-effective ways that we can build. And hopefully, and I know that the Minister of Works has received some of those proposals and has been considering some of those proposals. In fact, might have already approved some of them. But the question about importing in bulk, because we can get break bulk pricing. The only issue I have with that, Mr. Speaker, is that in so doing, you will have a negative effect on the local retailer, on the local hardware store. And so I am not prepared from my seat to suggest that we ought to allow a contractor to import this bulk building materials to get around purchasing from the local stores. In fact, Mr. Speaker, one of the amendments that is going to be moved in the committee stage is to point specifically to the fact that this exemption will apply not only to imported materials, but to materials bought domestically from local suppliers. Because we want to make sure that we do not disadvantage the local hardware stores. Absolutely, absolutely. So, Mr. Speaker, the other point to also outline is that value-added tax is not exempted, because there is no provision in the law for value-added tax to be exempted in any case. And so I want to make sure that the public understands that the exemptions relate to customs duties and excise tax. Mr. Speaker, the other point that I wanted to point out is that there are some restrictions with respect to the building material. And this is important for Bahamians to understand, because I know the temptation will be to purchase, get an exemption to build a home in one of these approved subdivisions, go and buy material, and give it to your cousin, your auntie, your uncle, whoever else, and buy more. I want to caution that those who are lucky or privileged enough to receive an allocation and an exemption, that they ought to treat it as a sacred trust. Because the government of the Bahamas is providing a benefit, a concession to you to build in an approved subdivision. And those materials that you purchase must be used in that construction. There are significant penalties, Mr. Speaker, attached to this bill to dissuade any person who may wish or have the thought that they can somehow cheat the government and cheat their fellow residents by taking advantage of this concession. And so that no one can say that they don't know, Mr. Speaker, should an offense occur, this act shall be punishable on conviction thereof to a fine of twice the value of the concession. So, and or to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. Or both, yes. So, Mr. Speaker, that means that the duty was supposed to be $1,000 and you take that material and you go to build somebody else's house or put it somewhere else, and you're caught, you can pay $2,000 on a duty. In addition to that, the law gives the minister the right to confiscate that material. And so I want to caution those who will take advantage of this concession to please use it for the benefit that it is granted. Mr. Speaker, this bill gives the homeowner 2 years to complete construction from the date that he would have received the approvals. And that is very deliberate, Mr. Speaker, because what we want is to have persons build. We don't want persons to get a lot, to hold on to that lot, get the exemption, and either try to flip it or to just hold it, hoping that prices go up so that they can benefit. That's not the idea, Mr. Speaker. The idea is to stimulate the construction industry, is to stimulate credit, and it is to stimulate construction jobs. So this is a win-win-win kind of piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. This will encourage and increase the level of home ownership in our country. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, whenever you have a stake in something, you tend to feel more patriotic about it because you own a piece of this rock. You feel a little more responsible about it, and you take more interest in your community, in your society. And so I think that this is a very timely and creative piece of legislation that the government has brought forth today, one that will directly affect the Bahamian homeowner, particularly those young people who are trying to just start out, and those who've been working hard, have saved up some money, but cannot afford the normal or the average cost of a lot and home here, particularly in New Providence, where this is most critical. But an important point, I think, Mr. Speaker, is that this is not just limited to New Providence. This will apply to government subdivisions throughout the country. And I know, certainly in my constituency, there is a subdivision being built with the infrastructure being installed right now in McLeanstown. And I certainly look forward to them being able to take advantage of this particular concession. Mr. Speaker, as I say, the government will roll this out in a sensible, well-planned way, because we do not want to create imbalances in the construction and in our revenues. But needless to say, that we will be responsive to the needs of our community, needs for housing, and we will certainly watch to see how quickly this offer is taken up and adjust our course accordingly. Mr. Speaker, last point I want to make, just in respect to the comment about reckless borrowing. Mr. Speaker, I've heard this over and over again, and the PLP, the opposition can't seem to understand it. I'm going to try one more time, Mr. Speaker, because it keeps coming up, that this government has borrowed $1.4 million. Billion, $1.4 billion. Mr. Speaker, so that this lie, sorry, that's an unparliamentary word, this untruth can finally be put to rest, hopefully for the last time, Mr. Speaker. The government of the Bahamas in 2017-18 budget year has borrowed, has taken a total borrowing of $1.4 billion. And here's how the $1.4 billion is broken down, because it is important. $750 million of that is related to refinancing of loans of debt that was amassed under previous administrations, including theirs, Mr. Speaker. It's not new money. It's taking a loan and rolling it over because you don't have the cash to pay it out. If you had the cash, you would pay it out. But we don't have the cash to pay it out, so we had to go and borrow to pay the loan. And that's all we did. No new debt, Mr. Speaker. Refinancing. And I'm sure the member for Exuma and Ragged Island understands this clearly. He understands this very clear, and I don't understand why he doesn't explain it to his leader so he can stop saying it and sound like he knows what he's talking about. Mr. Speaker, educate them, man. I heard the senator on the radio, on one of the radio shows just now, saying the same thing. And you know, it's interesting because I remember when the senator sat right here, and I tell him all the time, please stay out of financial matters because you really don't understand. That's why you could fly all around the world spending money and don't think it means anything. Mr. Speaker, $750 million is to refinance existing loans that we met in place. $400 million was to borrow to pay existing obligations of the government that we met in place, for which there was demand, immediate demand, threatening actions, Mr. Speaker. $400 million to pay bills that we met on May 10th, sitting in the drawer, for which people wanted their money.
Who was the Minister of Finance?
7 and 4 is 11.
Senate bill, wasn't it?
I think it was the Senate bill. Okay?
The Minister of Wages.
We didn't just decide that we want to borrow $400 million to go pay some bills. People were making demands, $400 million of them. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, because the member for Cat Island is making my next point. Which is, Mr. Speaker, even after we made the call for those bills to be put forth so we know what we were dealing with, and we got this $400 million number, 3 calls later, Mr. Speaker, all the way through to October, we still getting bills and demands for payment that there was no provision in the budget to pay. No provision.
All the way up to February in the
Mr.
Ministry of
Speaker,
Education.
no provision. And so the truth of the matter is, when you see the results for this year, you really ought to pat us on the back.
Yes.
Because the reality is we have achieved the results so far, and you know, I'm always cautious. I'm always cautious.
In spite of
We have achieved the results thus far in spite of having to pay additional bills that we had no knowledge of.
$750
Where did
billion.
that money go?
Exuma, why
Mr. Speaker.
Chief Minister of Wages.
So, Mr. Speaker, $400 million to pay their bills.
1.25.
The remaining $322 million, Mr. Speaker, was to pay for the current year's projected deficit, which was approved by this Parliament. And the thing about that, Mr. Speaker, because since they want to throw rock, they can throw rock back at them too. That $322 million deficit,
Their year's budget.
this government did not come up with. That was not our spending plan. That's their spending plan.
You
Mr.
understand
Speaker.
the teacher now?
Their budget.
That's what they projected, Mr. Speaker. That's programs that they had,
Yes.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes,
That's
teacher.
obligations that they put, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, when they start to talk about this $1.4 billion,
Yes, teacher.
they're really being very, very hypocritical in the first instance. Disingenuous.
Yes, teacher.
Misleading the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. And it is unfortunate. They know better. I know. I'm not sure about Cat Island, Rumkins, and Salvador. I ain't too sure about him. But I know Exuma and Ragged Island knows better.
Well, that's why they got,
I know he knows better,
in the unlikely
Mr.
event
Speaker.
of them winning.
And
I'll be
so,
the
and
Minister of
so
Finance.
I will only prevail on him again to educate his members, because that is a very, very disingenuous wicket that they're on. They're misleading the Bahamian people again, Mr. Speaker. And outside, I would say a more stronger word than that. Right, Mr. Speaker? But that it's not right. It's not right, Mr. Speaker. And so Mr. Speaker, this bill, again, will create opportunities for Bahamians to have home ownership. It will stimulate the retail industry as materials are bought locally. It will stimulate the construction industry as we have a ramp up in construction of these affordable homes. It will increase the level of credit that is being generated through the financial institutions. And it will give the Bahamian people a chance to own a piece of the rock, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the bell ringed. I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, just before I leave, one last point, and that is a bit of good news that is included in an article with respect to the financial services industry. And I think it's just worth pointing out to the Bahamian people that we are making progress. And this is an article that is written by a Peg Reed, and it's from a Thought Leadership. And she basically speaks about the trend in foreign brokers in trading. And she says that although licenses like those that are issued by the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK are seen as the most credible in the world, the UK and European brokers are no longer providing the generous trading conditions client wants. And it goes on to explain a little bit, but the part that I thought was interesting, she said, after evaluating a dozen jurisdictions from all over the globe, I found the Bahamas regulatory framework to be the most sensible rules and guidelines. For decades, the jurisdiction has overseen large international financial services, mostly made up of investment firms and wealth management banks with brokers divisions. The Bahamas' low profile and quiet money characteristics make it hard to spot at first, but a close look reveals an opportunity for online brokers to reach a global audience. So, Mr. Speaker, I just say that to say that despite all of the challenges that we face with our international partners in respect to tax compliance and international financial regulations, there's some good news in the world with respect to the Bahamas and what we're doing here. And I want to particularly point out, as in this article speaks to, it says the Bahamas license is A grade and is a business-friendly jurisdiction with substantial infrastructure. Client protection is paramount, and this is why physical presence is required, including both an executive and compliance officer. And I just want to point that out because it's important, and also the Securities Commission that oversees the brokers, I want to give them credit because they received tremendous kudos in this article, and I want to encourage them to continue to do a good job. They represent us well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Exuma.
Interrupt the the good minister, but I believe
Are you on a point of order?
3327F, Mr. Speaker. Speaker,
Clarification?
3327F is the rule I'm referencing. Mr. Speaker, he referred to something that I said that was misunderstood. And I don't think this time it was an intentional attempt to mislead. I believe in this instant, when my time ran out, the point may have been truncated and he may not have heard it in its entirety. When I talked about bulk, well, I was talking about the government buildings, housing subdivisions. I wasn't talking about buying in bulk in the manner he referenced it. In fact, the point I was making was that one of the questions that I was raising, Mr. Speaker, was whether there was an assessment done on what the impact of this bill will have on local businesses. So I want to assure the minister that we both come from a fraternity called the Chamber, and we have a similar interest in ensuring the advancement of local business. There are some things we disagree on, but on this point, Mr. Speaker, I believe we're on one accord.
Thank you.
When it comes to matters of market forces and free market, we certainly don't have much differences. But he raises the one point that I didn't get an opportunity to speak about, and that is, in fact, this whole issue about Mr. Hold on, let me finish the point.
Honorable member.
No. I'm not finished. I'm responding to the member's concern, Mr. Speaker. The member spoke about government housing and contractors building for government. Mr. Speaker, my colleague from Garden Hill spoke about this, and the ground is littered with substandard construction from multiple administrations, Mr. Speaker. And so the whole idea is to get away from that, and it is to incentivize the contractor, incentivize the homeowner by bringing down that cost, and to regulate as government is intended to do. And I am sure that as a chamber member, he would agree with me. Absolutely. Private sector.
As many? Honorable member for Cat Island.
I either misunderstood or deliberately misquoted what I had to say. Or thirdly, he
With-
said,
with
the
res-
fact that I said they borrowed $1.4 billion. I thought it did not happen. Huh? No, I said 1.7 expenditure, but 1.4 borrowing. 1.7 expenditure between June 2017 to December 2017. 1.7 expenditure, which is $500 million over the similar period of the next. I understand and appreciate that. I'm saying you borrowed $1.4 billion. Is that what you borrowed? Okay, that's all.
I've already explained that to the member, and again, obviously he's still not getting it. And I don't know what else I can do for him. Draw a picture? You want to draw a map? Maybe you can understand it then, Mr. Speaker. Right? That is 1.7 billion. I don't know where he gets that from, but maybe he'll tell us where he got that from too at some point, Mr. Speaker. But the budget is coming up, and he will have his opportunity to explain exactly where he gets these numbers from, Mr. Speaker.
Teacher, put him in detention, then he may have...
As many? Chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Mr. Speaker, we're all hoping to go home soon. Mr. Speaker, the government is displaying today how truly democratic we are. We have at least about 10 other speakers because this bill is very important when we're providing land and homes for the Bahamian population. But the opposition has a rally this evening. And
Hopefully we have more than
75 people agree.
we had
Hopefully more than 75.
decided in a democratic fashion to cut many of our speakers so as to allow the opposition to proceed with their rally. We would listen this evening, and we will respond to their lies tomorrow.
Mistruth.
Is Fred going to table the report on why you lost?
We will listen tonight, and we will commence our response at 7 p.m. tomorrow on Marquis Street. And whoever are there to us, they will not be what you call a rent-a-crowd. Okay? But, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the wonderful people of Kalani, I'm happy to rise and support this bill, the Affordable Homes Bill 2018. And this landmark legislation will significantly increase home ownership throughout the Bahamas, helping potentially hundreds of Bahamians to realize the long-sought dream of a home to call their own. Along with the opportunity for work, education, and health care, access to affordable housing is vital for social development and human happiness and well-being, Mr. Speaker. And home ownership is good for family life and social stability. Home ownership, Mr. Speaker, is good for the economy, affording owners greater financial equity and social mobility. It is a source of great pride for a parent or a guardian to be able to pass on a home to the next generation. And Mr. Speaker, the social agenda and social vision of the Free National Movement is driven by our commitment to social justice and opportunity for our people. The FNM's, the government's agenda for economic growth, job creation, and entrepreneurship will be realized in tandem with a comprehensive social agenda. And this agenda, Mr. Speaker, will increase home ownership, it will reform education, it will boost health and nutrition, and reduce obesity. It will promote youth and community development. It will most certainly improve the lives of the poor in the Bahamas, and it will revitalize the over-the-hill communities. My administration, Mr. Speaker, will lead one of the most ambitious efforts in our history to reduce obesity and improve nutrition. This includes addressing the high rate of childhood obesity in our country, which appears to be around 50%, I am told. Addressing the scourge of chronic non-communicable diseases and obesity is a moral, social, and economic imperative. It is as essential as addressing the tremendous threat posed to us today by climate change. And Mr. Speaker, over the past several decades, many Bahamians were able to purchase homes through various government housing programs and subdivisions in New Providence, Grand Bahama, and the Family Islands. A number of these programs had various problems, including the poor quality of construction, the possible padding of cost, possible corrupt practices, lack of timeliness, and various other problems, Mr. Speaker. And we seek in this legislation to address these problems. Under the Access to Affordable Homes Bill 2018, the government will provide service-ready land at a reduced cost, which will be affordable to scores of Bahamians now locked out of the home market because of the high cost. What, you mean the people can't hear me? You want me to start again? Our program, Mr. Speaker, will pass on tremendous savings to our homeowners. The average lot that will be sold has a value of $80,000 to $100,000 today. But the government will sell these lots for approximately $30,000 and less. This is a dramatic savings. It represents a savings of about $60,000, $70,000 to that young homeowner. There will be additional savings. Material for home building will be duty-free, which may save homeowners again an additional $30,000 to $40,000, well in excess of $100,000. We are also looking at concessions on other materials, such as solar panels. And this is a part of our long-term vision for large-scale solarization and the use of renewable energy. An essential feature, Mr. Speaker, of our program is that homeowners may choose their own contractors and monitor the work of their respective contractors. This provides both flexibility and control. And under this legislation, homeowners will be empowered to utilize the mortgage process, employ their own architect and or contractor, thereby permitting homeowners to design the home of their choice. This program will also afford single mothers, moderate income families, law enforcement personnel, teachers, nurses, and other professionals greater and more affordable access to home ownership. The need, Mr. Speaker, for affordable housing is tremendous. And this groundbreaking program is geared to address some of that great demand. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret that various government housing programs have been fraught with challenges, from the hiring of inexperienced contractors to improper inspections, which often resulted in shoddy work and poorly constructed homes. And consequently, the government has spent many millions of dollars in repair to correct the problems. In some cases, Mr. Speaker, I'm advised, the Department of Housing has had to pay repairs 10 years after homes were completed. And in some instances, the foundations were so poorly constructed that some homes were not, individuals were not able to move into these homes. Because of these problems, Mr. Speaker, my administration made the decision to shift the focus from the construction of houses to the sale of service lots. And the Department of Housing has been directed to cease the business of building houses. Instead, Mr. Speaker, the department will concentrate on installing the necessary infrastructure on the land to be developed and sold as residential service lots. The government has identified properties for subdivision development and the sale of residential service lots in New Providence, Exuma, San Salvador, Abaco, and Andres.
Yes.
And it is our hope, Mr. Speaker, to extend this program during our term in office to allow our young people, as many as possible, the opportunity to purchase land throughout as long as we are here.
Yes.
Our program, Mr. Speaker, will also encourage second home ownership in the Family Island. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that the first service lots in New Providence will be available for sale in June or July of this year. And these service lots will be provided for the uniformed branches initially, meaning nurses, policemen and women, immigration officers,
Yes.
customs officers, defense force officers,
Yes.
corrections officers, prison officers, and Mr. Speaker, teachers. So these individuals initially will be the first tranche, Mr. Speaker, and will be able to purchase such lots. Some are being provided in, what's this area? Sunset Close and Fox Hill area.
That's the happiest we've seen you all year. She could be happy. That's the first president the whole year.
Lots. The newly instituted practice, Mr. Speaker, to provide service lots to Bahamians will reduce the first-time owners in New Providence and the Family Islands. I also want to mention, Mr. Speaker, that San Salvador will likewise be available as of June, July. Lots. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have intentionally said than $30,000, but I can assure the public that in some instances it's by far less, but I don't want to press the economy on one number. So I've said less than 30. It could be 20, it could be 18, but it's less than 30. It could be. It could be. The Family Islands will certainly, the Family Islands will certainly be cheaper than New Providence.
Yes.
So San Salvador will be June, July, but the uniform branches first, nurses, policemen, etc. Potential homeowners, Mr. Speaker, will be given a 2-year window to construct their home. This will empower potential homeowners to be solely responsible for the construction of their home by utilizing their own architect and or contractor. They may also opt to use one of a number of pre-existing architectural plans offered by the government. And as I've said, Mr. Speaker, it's our hope to give every Bahamian an opportunity to buy land in their Bahamas and construct home at an affordable price. The prices of land in this country is now too high. And unless individuals who have money purchase land and provide for their children and grandchildren, others will not have an opportunity. And it's our job to provide opportunities for each and every Bahamian. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, enables a citizen of Bahamas who owns a service lot in a government-approved subdivision to apply to the Ministry of Finance for approval of exemption from customs duties and excise tax on all materials necessary during the construction of a single home, family home dwelling. Once the home is built to government specification, an occupancy certificate will be issued by the Department of Environmental Health Services. And Mr. Speaker, everyone who has embarked on constructing a home is very familiar with the challenges, delays, and extenuating circumstances that arise. And this bill takes these matters into account and provides a potential homeowner with the option to request a one-year extension from the home completion date should a challenge arise. Mr. Speaker, this legislation has a number of necessary restrictions. Potential homeowners are to refrain, I repeat, refrain from using materials that may have been exempted from customs duties and excise tax for any other purpose other than the construction of a single family home on the serviced lot. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're talking today about residential property. The question has been asked repeatedly, what about commercial property? Mr. Speaker, as we look at what's happening today in the Family Islands, the direction of the hotel industry is changing. We're now moving to bed and breakfast hotels, small boutique hotels. And therefore, we will come back to Parliament with a commercial legislation providing the same opportunities for Bahamians who want to enter the bed and breakfast business. Mr. Speaker, you see, we recognize that what's happening today, foreign individuals are building second homes in our Family Islands. And they are using those homes as bed and breakfast or room inventory. And if the government does not take control of this matter now, 10, 20 years from the day, the Bahamians will lose the Family Island and the tourist industry. So, Mr. Speaker, the legislation to be brought sometime next year, the commercial component will allow Bahamians to purchase land for bed and breakfast at reduced cost with all the infrastructure in place, and they will be able to build again duty-free. But, Mr. Speaker, what is most important about the legislation that will come is that we understand that bed and breakfast means that you're selling breakfast as a part of the package. Mr. Speaker, we are Bahamians, and we try to encourage Bahamian entrepreneurship and Bahamian businesses. We try to grow communities. And therefore, if a bed and breakfast facility sell only Bahamian products as breakfast, they will be incentivized again. We also recognize that would stimulate the local community to produce whatever is necessary for that hotel or bed and breakfast. We also recognize
Gone from a U to an A.
that as business starts to grow, those individuals may possibly ask for facilities. They may want to now provide lunch in addition to breakfast. Mr. Speaker, in such a situation, they will be further incentivized. However, and this is the point, if one non-Bahamian item appear on your bed, on your breakfast or lunch menu, then you will lose your incentive.
Corned beef is Bahamian. Corned beef is Bahamian.
We believe so. But, Mr. Speaker, just to divert a little, the government is working on programs to incentivize Bahamians, and I cannot go into details at this point in time, incentivize Bahamians to go into areas that we and foods that we do not produce now. And once they are prepared to go into those particular areas, they will be exempted from all forms of taxation for 5 years, allowing them
Like going to farming.
to start their business. Now, the question may be asked, we're giving away a lot to the Bahamian. And the answer is no, we're not giving anything away. It's something we don't produce now and we import.
Yep.
So we're now asking you to produce it and we incentivize you. So if you produce it without paying necessary taxes, you produce jobs. That's money for the economy. Those individuals buy at our supermarkets. That's money for the economy. Those individuals pay national insurance. That's money for our economy. Those individuals attend our schools, etc. So it's not a loss, it's a win. So, Mr. Speaker, we will bring such legislation sometime soon. Mr. Speaker, should a potential homeowner fail to commence construction on the service lot within 2 years or 3 years under extraordinary circumstances, the bill provides for a resumption of title by the Minister of Housing and possible equitable restitution should a person fail to act or complete a dwelling home within the specified period. The bill will also allow many families to realize their dream of home ownership and in turn have a better quality of life. In the words of a former U.S. Congressman, I quote, "Home ownership is a cornerstone of a strong community."
Yes.
And we, Mr. Speaker, will build strong communities.
Yep.
This new access to affordable homes is one of the cornerstones on which my government intends to build a strong, more vibrant Bahamas with access to greater opportunity for all. Mr. Speaker, our ambitious housing program and its incentive will help to boost new construction. Our housing program will create considerable opportunities for the construction industry and related businesses. And I note our second largest industry is construction. The construction sector in the Bahamas will be boosted by a number of projects, including our home ownership and housing program, capital works projects throughout the Family Island and throughout the country, including the Family Islands, hotel and tourism construction on Grand Bahama and other islands. And Mr. Speaker, In his apostolic visit to the Bahamas on February 1st, 1979, the late Pope John Paul II offered this prayer, which I wish to make my own. He said during his brief visit here to the Bahamas, I quote, "I ask God to lead you to the full achievement of your destiny." He went on to say, "May He give to the people of the Bahamas rich and lasting blessings. May He assist the poor, comfort the sick, guide the youth, and bring peace to every heart." End quote, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the mission of my government. Our new housing program will help to foster the common good and to create a more equitable and just society. Mr. Speaker, I am certain that no member of the opposition can disagree with this. And Mr. Speaker, before I close, I would like to wish all the mothers of the Bahamas happy Mother's Day. And tomorrow, I'll be attending a memorial service to the Defense Force in honor of those young Defense Force officers who had lost their lives on May 10th. And I send condolence out to their entire family. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill, and I think this bill would allow and give every Bahamian, young and old, an opportunity to own a home in this Bahamas. After all, Mr. Speaker, before I close, I want the Bahamian populace to realize and to know that the land within this Bahamas, Crown land, is theirs. It's not mine. It's not yours. It's theirs. And they should be given an opportunity to own it. Now, I know, Mr. Speaker, there has been a lot of requests for Crown land. Yeah, there's been a lot of requests for Crown land. And it may not have been issued yet, but I want those to know who have requested that we are proceeding with a land audit so that we know where exactly the lands are, who had received land, are they complying with what they had made obligation with, or are they sitting on thousands of acres of Bahamian lands for speculation? We want to find this out so that we can now properly bring those land back in to the bank and distribute to the people fair and clear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpkin, San Salvador.
Speaker, just wanted to ask two questions of the Prime Minister. The first is whether this bill signals the abandonment of your government constructing homes for Bahamians. Fine. I'm happy there. Let's answer. Yeah, please. Yeah.
But it allows, what happened is, you know and I know, that there are a lot of shoddy jobs, overpricing, corruption, whatever else. And we want to try and remove as much as possible, allow the Bahamians to build their home. You know, my mother, we built our home. And yes, it took a long time. It took us about 20 years to build. block by block. But the point is, we build. Having gone through that, you want to try and speed up the process. Give individuals an opportunity. Not 20 years, but give them an opportunity.
I'm of the view, and I've always been of the view, Mr. Speaker, that government is better able and has the resources to defend against those ills which you have identified. If you leave it to the individual, transferring that challenge to an individual may become a bit challenging. That's all. I mean, I understand the position. So,
Government should do what it's supposed to do. Regulate and ensure that proper inspection is done and work is done in a proper manner. That's government responsibility, not out there competing with contractors and others themselves.
you've made the point that it is government regulates, and it's through those what you have identified is just speaks to the failure of government, meaning all administrations, and we just need to shore it up. And the second question is, you mentioned second home owners for service lots, and I'm wondering whether this is just for Family Island, whether you have yet defined or set up the protocol for the pre-qualifications for being able to acquire service lots.
First-time owners, but the minister with responsibility, he's off at this particular time. So when we discussed the budget, you know, we came in, it's the people's time, you will hear the people's budget. So.
Not your leftovers.
Honorable members, at this moment, just before we proceed, on behalf of all members who were not able to address Parliament today, I wish to extend to all the mothers of the Bahamas a very, very happy Mother's Day. And on behalf of all members, yes, on behalf of all members, we wish to extend to all mothers of the Bahamas a very happy Mother's Day. And also, at this moment, if we can all stand in a moment of silence to honor our fallen heroes from the Royal Bahamas Defense Force who gave their lives in defense of and the protection of this, in defense of this country and the protection of its citizens. Thank you, honorable members. I'm gonna just move and second it, and then you come in. It has been. Honorable members, it has been moved. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to promote greater access to affordable homes through the grant of certain exemptions for the building of dwelling homes on service lots within a government-owned subdivision. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to promote greater access to affordable homes through the grant of certain exemptions for the building of dwelling homes on service lots within a government-owned subdivision.
Thank you.
For the second reading.
For the second readings, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further second readings at this time, and I do move that the House do suspend at this time until 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 16th of May, 2018. I do second that.
It has been moved. It has been moved and seconded. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspend to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 16th of May, 2018. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 16th of May.